Hello there, El Presidente Tel here, doing a response video of sorts to Lee B19 Yido's Analysis of BNP Policies, Crime and Justice. Now, I've known Lee for a number of years, good friend of mine, and I thought, just for you, I'd play devil's advocate on this one and maybe try and give a reasoned BNP perspective as to why the policy that they've decided to pursue on crime and justice might be in place. Now, for the record of those out there, as a way of disclaimer, I have never supported the BNP. In fact, I'm probably what they would call a raving communist. I'm in favour of immigration, civil liberties, and I'm not even that overwhelmingly patriotic. So, some people would argue, well, what's he doing giving the delivery of the BNP? I'm merely playing a devil's advocate here. If I get anything wrong, then feel free to correct it. But let's take a look at the BNP's policies themselves. Now, under the title of Crime and Justice, you said at the start, under freeing the police and the courts from the politically correct straitjacket that's preventing them from doing their job, and the liberal fixation with the rights of criminals, you were confused, you said it was vague, you didn't know what it meant. I'm going to try and hazard a guess here. It's probably due to what the tabloids have obsessed with, especially The Sun has obsessed with this for a number of years, which is the Human Rights Act of 1998, which incorporates the European Convention of Human Rights into British law. Now, this piece of legislation does give extensive rights to everyone, but it's very controversial. It's seen as a enshrining of civil liberties by liberals and allowing people to get away with absolute murder by conservatives. Not the party conservatives, I mean political conservatives. So their argument is, by getting rid of the Human Rights Act, we will eliminate a lot of the rights that criminals hide behind, and therefore we will allow the police to do more effective policing, because they're not going to be having to sign a form every 5 minutes, which means that due process has been followed, and will therefore ensure that when it gets to trial and form 27XB-Z has not been signed, that the person can't just walk out of court on a technicality. That's roughly what they're getting at. A lot of this form filling in that's been put in place will be abandoned, allowing police to, they would argue, get back onto the streets and deal with criminals on the street, more in the line of sort of a Gene Hunt type character, for better or worse. Restoring corporal punishment for petty criminals and vandals. Now, you were talking about the lack of rehabilitation. Well, the argument could be that the Chinese use this particular form of punishment, which is, in their version, they stand people in the middle of the town square on a platform with a sign round their neck stating whatever crime they've committed. I think it's part of this policy that perhaps shame could be a good motivating factor within this society. If you feel that everyone in society is going to know what crime you've committed, then you might think twice before doing it. Restoring capital punishment for paedophiles, terrorists and murderers as an option for judges in cases where guilt is proven beyond dispute. Well, if you take aside the fact that guilt is never 100% beyond dispute in a legal system, and that's why we have the beauty of the appeals courts, the part of the argument would be that some crimes are considered so heinous by members of the public that there can only be one option. Now, if you wanted an analysis as to why the death penalty doesn't work, if you go on nodeathpenalty.org, they cite a study by a person called Thorsten Sellin, who analysed executions between 1989 and 2002. Now, the murder rates, year on year, despite Texas having a slightly higher average, they were almost identical patterns. New York had no executions, California had 1 execution, and Texas had 239. Many of the studies that show that death penalties deter murder have so many serious flaws and omissions, according to Professor Jeffrey Fagan of Columbia Law, the work falls well within the unfortunate category of junk science. So the anti-death penalty lobby argues that there have been no conclusive studies that the death penalty is a deterrent to violent crime. So that would be your factual data for that. But on an emotional level, the BNP will argue that there are crimes where the death penalty is the only considerable option within society. Now, whether you agree with that or not, there are probably people with regards to cases such as the murderer Ian Huntley, the murderer Peter Sutcliffe, rapists such as Richard Ramirez in America, that you would argue that those people can never be reformed and they will probably die in prison unrepentant. So some would argue that the death penalty would perhaps have been better for them. The next part of the policy you were talking about was welfare to work, essentially, the policy that was used in the United States, compelling people to work, but at least for unemployment benefit more than 6 months in return for decent payment, which was essentially welfare to work in the United States. You got everyone picked up, they went in a little bus to a shopping centre or whatnot and did little menial labour to the point that they then became contributing workers to society. Now, whether it would work, I don't know, but you would have to weigh up the cost of getting everyone trained against the cost of keeping them on benefit, and if it was more cost effective to keep them on benefit, you would argue the point of the policy would be perhaps a little flawed. But when you say jobs should be for people who want to work, who should do what they want to do, someone in the BNP might perhaps argue that sometimes having a job isn't about what you want to do, it's about doing something for society. And if you've taken from society in terms of benefits and you've sat on your backside all day signing on, then you should continue to contribute to society in terms of compulsory work programs. You're still being paid, so what's the problem? So I'd be interested to hear your view on that one. The socialist housing block, concrete monstrosities of urban areas, torn down and replaced with decent housing that encourages family units. Apart from the fact of not knowing how a house encourages a family unit, whether it's a 5-bedroom detached or a 1-bedroom flat in a council estate, you know what they mean. They mean that ethnic minorities get put in housing estates, and then housing estates apparently become breeding grounds for crime. Now, I don't have any statistic to hand on that. I mean, you can look at less economically well-off areas and say that they are more crime-ridden, but there's crime everywhere. But that is basically what they mean, getting rid of the ethnic enclaves and putting in nice, decent, gated communities. Overcrowding in prisons solved by deportation of tens of thousands of criminals. Now, you'd asked, is deportation possible? Well, we're already deporting criminals who are required under extradition of European arrest warrants to go to their country of origin. So it's quite easy to arrange a deportation. But like you say, whether the countries would be willing to accept convicted criminals in the UK back into their home countries is a whole other kettle of fish. And something that essentially would probably need a law passed in Parliament by any BNP administration to get anywhere. Making prisons more austere, that again has come from a story in the tabloids that's perpetuated for years about them having PlayStations and DVD players and them effectively being rather cushy little places if you're on good behaviour. Their argument, prison should be a punishment, not just a rehabilitation. You shouldn't have those kind of luxuries. Those are given to people who don't commit crime under their remit. You say that you could potentially be in favour of electronically tagged chain gangs for coastal defences. Now, that's partly a punishment. That's manual labour, like hard labour. And I thought you were more in favour of rehabilitation. So I'd be interested to see how you feel that chain ganging someone is a way of rehabilitating them, or are you more in favour of the more utilitarian view that they're contributing to society, so that form of punishment is all right? Removing political correctness shackles of police, that's Human Rights Act, and getting rid of ethnic monitoring of suspects questioned. And the part that you went on to, the rights of victims to defend their homes. Now, I would argue, you say about stabbing someone in the back, I would say, who cares whether they're in the back, in the front, whatever. They're defending their home, the people stabbing them. And since the very English belief of your home is your castle, why shouldn't someone take all necessary measures to defend their property? So I'd like to hear your view on that one, because that's one I personally am in favour of. I do believe that people have the right to defend their property, and we've just seen a case in Manchester where a burglar was stabbed to death by a family and they're not facing charges. So in effect we already have that kind of reasonable force doctrine in the courts. But I'd like to know what your opinion is. Do you feel that you should be able to defend your home no matter what the consequences? But anyway, I'm going to end the video here. It was a good video by you, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the debate it will engender. See you later.